researchers and research the link between endometriosis and mental health and conditions such as depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. So, Dora and Gita, health first of all.
So I have endometriosis, obviously, so that's how. I wasn't diagnosed for 15 years, so not between 6 and 10 years, 15 whole years. I'm from an Eastern European country, Hungary, and basically endometriosis is non-existent there. No one knows about it. And I knew something was wrong with my body since I was 14. I fainted when I had my period because I lost so much blood. I had no support system. I lived in an abusive environment. So I was alone with my pain. So I really learned to mask my pain. So you saw it in the movie too. I did the exact same thing. I just pretended as if everything was okay, and then I went to the bathroom and threw up because of the pain, since I was 14 years old. And I went to several gynecologists. I never got an answer, ever. They gave me contraceptives. Sometimes they helped for a while, but then the symptoms always came back. And then I still didn't give up. I still went and I still wanted to search for answers. I couldn't find any. And then in 2016, I moved to Spain from Hungary, and Spain has an amazing health system, which is great for me, right? And I still didn't go to the doctor for like 2.5 years because I was gaslighted for so long, even by my own mother, who told me that I'm weak and I should get it together and stand up, even though I couldn't literally stand up for a whole day. And then when I went to the doctor in Spain in 2020, in January 2020, I got diagnosed with endometriosis immediately. They could touch it with their hands. So I cannot even believe how it's possible that in Hungary no one saw that and no one realized what was happening. But then you know what happened in 2020? COVID happened. So my surgery was scheduled for March 2020. Obviously it didn't happen. And that year was extremely hard for me, for everyone, obviously because of COVID, but my endometriosis got so bad that basically I was out 1 week out of a month. And I was finishing my PhD dissertation at the same time, so it was a really stressful time. And even when I was scheduling my PhD defense, I had to check when I'm gonna have my period and ovulation. So that's how I did it. And the same with my wedding, I had to check exactly when I can actually get married with my husband. So then I waited until November 2020, so almost a whole year to have this surgery. And then finally I had it, and it was a 7-hour-long excision surgery. And I was totally alone because no one could even visit me. It was during COVID. And I was in the hospital for 10 days, and it took me 2 months to get better. I lost so much blood in these 2 months that I thought that actually the surgery didn't help at all, but then it did, actually. I'm much better since then. This was November 2020. It's more than 2 years now, and I'm doing better. I'm not saying I have no pain. Of course there is pain, but obviously it's still doable. So that's my story with endometriosis. So how did we get into this research? We do research about psychiatric disorders. So I kind of wanted to understand the link between a physical illness like endometriosis and mental health, because it's kind of obvious, right, that if someone suffers from chronic pain, that person likely develops anxiety, depression, and even eating disorders, because this happens a lot with patients with endometriosis, that they just have this avoidance behavior with food because they know that they're gonna have IBS symptoms if they eat something, right? So of course that's why I also lost like I think 15 pounds or around that, and I'm anyway very thin, so that's a lot for me. So I started to read about it, and there are some publications about this topic, but it's all like very low sample size. No one ever actually did this study related to eating disorders, although I think it's logical. So I was thinking, we are doing big data analysis, so we deal with 10,000s of hundreds of thousands of samples. So I wanted to see if population-wide women with endometriosis develop anxiety, depression, and eating disorders more often, and we do like 4 times more often than the general population, which is a really extremely high number. And researchers are talking about endometriosis lately that it should be considered as a systemic disease. It's not a gynecological disease, it's not a reproductive disease. I rather call it non-reproductive at this point, because when it's about women's health, it's always about the reproduction. Our function in society is to conceive. And that's the only reason why anyone cares about us in the medical world, right? So that's the thing. And that's why I did this population-wide analysis with Kita and with other collaborators together. And then we wanted to understand if there is any biology behind it, because we know that maybe I develop anxiety, but you don't, right? So we don't know why. Why is that? Why is this happening? Obviously, it's because of environmental factors too, but also probably there is some biology, and we actually found some genetic link between endometriosis and all these three disorders, which is very interesting. So that's the story behind the research, and we didn't get money for this research. I also wanted to mention it's not like we even applied for it. I didn't even think it's possible. That's the funny thing about it. So I'm actually working on other projects, so I'm paid to do other stuff, but this was a side project. And I was really, really afraid how will people take it, because I learned during these years that no one cares about endometriosis, right? But actually, people liked it. We got several interviews, we got invited for the screening, so I'm really, really happy that this is happening. And I find it so amazing that I suffered for 15 years and I can actually share what I know about these conditions with everyone. I think it's beautiful. So we analyzed 270,000 women. That's really, really high number. This never happened before, right? Among these, like 9,000 were cases, so women who had endometriosis, and the rest were controls in the study. So no one ever did such a large-scale study to understand this. And the novelty was also the association with eating disorders, which was never found. It was suggested in mice, but obviously we cannot really compare mice to actual women, right? So that's new, and also the genetic study is new, that they found actually link between endometriosis and depression before, so that was already done, but we also added anxiety and eating disorders, and we also found a link. So now I also started to be interested in trauma, because we also know that if you're a trauma survivor, it's more likely that you will develop chronic diseases. So I think that would be the next step, probably.
Yeah, it sounds super interesting also as someone who experienced a lot of trauma herself growing up and who's now suffering from endometriosis. And also, I really admire you for getting started in this research without any official funding. I think it's probably one of the coolest side projects to have ever happened at Yale. Great side hustle. Gita, do you have anything to add to what Dora just said?
So first thing, I just want to say that how awesome it is that these women had so much pain and they still did so much research. And so let's give a big round of applause to not only your warriors, but any heroes, because that's what these women are. So I'm truly, I don't have endometriosis, but I know someone who does. And when I met Dora, it was very surprising to me, also heart-touching, because so many of the things that Veronica mentioned I'd already heard almost verbatim from her. And I was, I mean, we all know she's very bright. She's done all this creative work. She's the brains behind the study, asking the question which will hopefully, start that spark that is needed in research. So all of the big round of applause for Dora here, because she's gonna ask questions which should have been asked several years ago. But we are late to the party because, as she mentioned, women are conceived more from as a as a sex that helps for providing progeny to your family, but not as people who have human rights and pain and so on and so forth. A women's resilience cannot be the reason for their pain, I think is a big problem. I personally, my role in our lab is I'm looking at the genetics of mental health disorders and physical health, so primarily age-related disorders. that's another question that's not been investigated, is that how does individuals who have mental health conditions, how does that affect as they age in life? Again, we are now discovering new and new associations, and the fact that genetics does play a role. And several of these conditions that we thought were truly psychiatric, like depression, anxiety, they're not really psychiatric. They also have a lot of somatic manifestation, which people used to call that they are somatic in nature or psychosomatic, and we cannot explain them, or they end up in that unclassified diagnosis that one of the doctors in the movie mentioned. So the question comes back to, where is the education? And then it's like, we have never studied this, well then we should do the research. And I think getting funding, which is specifically for endometriosis, and for a project to not be a side project anymore, but an actual focus of your work, is really vital. So I'm truly privileged to be with Dora and get to know her, and learn so much from her. And I think that was my role here, to be her supporting system here. That's all.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a very humble take. I'm sure you also contributed a lot to the project.